Welcome to the Intentional Father and MLG podcast. We are on a journey of exploring how to grow as godly dads, making intentional and practical steps towards building stronger relationships with our children and to help them discover who they are in Christ. We're on to session 3 as part of this course we're working through together, and it's called Understanding Your Child. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. As always, I'm joined by my good friend John. How are you today, John?
Good, thank you, Tim. Good to be with you.
Good. Well, we are actually quite geographically closer than we were before. My internet died thanks to the engineering works of my local provider, and so I'm now sat in one of John's children's bedrooms on a very comfortable chair, which is more comfortable than the chair I had and less creaky than the chair I had in the past. So it's good to be with you in your home, John, as we record this together. Praise God that we live around the corner from one each another. So we're going to be talking today about understanding your child. And I think this is such an important session in this kind of journey, this course we're on, because the thing about parenting is that you can have 3 children and actually you need to parent them all quite differently, don't you? They're not the same. And so it's so important, I think, to understand your child, understand what they're like, their personality, their preferences, all that sort of stuff. But we're actually going to start, before we get on to things like personality, preferences, understanding their character, their way they think, etc. We're actually going to talk a little bit about kind of the developmental side of that. And obviously you are, in your secular work, you are a medical practitioner, aren't you, who specialises in paediatrics, am I correct?
Indeed.
So you're going to give us from a maybe sort of more of a sort of an actual kind of medical perspective, if that is that the right term, medical perspective, kind of some of the stages of child development. So we're going to do like a crash course in child development. So do you want to just take it away and kind of lead us in on this?
Yeah. No, I hope this is really important. We'll talk about physical and psychological development as our kids grow up. And I think we're quite used to the physical changes. Like most people would say, yeah, I understand that there are physical changes that happen, particularly in puberty. Puberty occurs earlier in girls than boys. It brings lots of changes to their bodies, body image, confidence, and so on. And actually, we're going to look a little bit more at the specifics of the boy-girl thing in a later episode, because I think we feel that's really important, because that will impact how they are, and there'll be some different challenges because of bodily changes for physical. So we'll come back to that a little bit about the physical changes in bodies, which will affect how we parent our children. I wonder if it'd be helpful just to spend a little bit of time on the psychological stages, though, today. And I just want to introduce you to a guy called Erik Erikson. It's a great name, isn't it? I do feel jealous. And he's a psychologist who named these stages of development, and they're quite kind of accepted nowadays. And actually, I personally, as a Christian, who's a doctor, psychologist sort of person, feel that they are helpful, and they kind of sit alongside, if you like, faith. They're not exhaustive, they don't explain everything, but they're helpful. So here's a few stages of childhood. So first you've got infancy, cute baby stage, they arrive, and the question that sort of small children are asking is they're looking for safety, aren't they? That when they sort of go away from you and they explore and they come back. I've got a little one at the moment, and that's what happens. He'll go away and explore and then come back, put a hand on my knee. Very cute. But the question that they're asking at that stage is, who do I trust? Who's going to keep me warm? Who's going to give me food? Who's going to keep me safe? And do I trust this person?
As an adult, I'm still asking questions.
Yeah, are you? Oh, Tim, we need to have a separate session on that for you. Bless you. But yeah, so when my little one sees Tim, he's thinking, am I safe? Can I trust this man? And actually, my little one gets on quite well, doesn't he, Tim? So
he does.
Doing very well. So infancy. Secondly is like the toddler stage. This is when they kind of get to 2 to 4. This is when a toddler starts to think, hey, I'm not attached. I can run. And sometimes they'll run off and not come back, right? But I have agency. I can do things to this world. I can push something off a table and it will make a noise. And I'm going to keep doing it because it's a lot of fun, right? So I've got this autonomy. But also they're understanding what it means to be, a good girl or a good boy. You hear that quite a lot, don't you? Have I done the right thing? Have I, am I sort of making the right choices? And toddlers are very attuned to that. They'll look to you. They'll know if you disapprove. Some of us like we'll just give that little look. If you may have done that to one of your kids, and they just know you're looking at them, and they know they've done the wrong thing, and they'll either cry or something and come and for a cuddle, or they'll just dig their heels in and do it more. I don't know what sort of toddler you were, Tim, but whether you were a dig your heels in kind of toddler or whether you'd crumble, I don't know. I don't remember you at that age.
I was a perfect child, John.
Of course. Oh well, that's why you're here, isn't it? Just modelling perfection. So infancy, toddler years. Thirdly is early childhood, which is sort of the 5 to 7 year old age, and this is a stage where there's a sense of purpose, where children might take initiative. Um, they know what they want to do. They know what they don't want to do. They can get, that this is where food fads may stay ingrained. I don't like this. I don't like that. Or I want to play football. Or no, I'm not going to play football in the sports team, etc., etc. So that's the early childhood phase. I think the middle childhood phase is really interesting. So it's from about 8 to 12, and this is where children start to think about their sense of competence. It's like, what am I good at? What am I not good at? So a classical thing would be like they'll come home and they'll be like, oh, so and so did really well in this. They know who's first when it
Yeah,
came to the maths test or something. So Lacey was first, and Connor was second, and or I came first in the race. Or they start to have this sense of like, what am I good at? What am I not good at? And of course, these patterns, some people will look back and they'll say, I remember when I was a kid that I realized I just felt there was nothing I was good at. I was always last. I was always picked last in the playground. You have those moments. I remember that. I remember being picked last in the football team. I just knew I wasn't great at football. It was a bit gutting. So actually, in that stage of childhood, it's good as parents to be thinking and encouraging our children um, in something that they're good at, whether it's creativity or problem solving or being good with people, to just nurture that sense of competence in certain areas. Am I making sense so far? Because that's 4 out of 5.
yeah, absolutely. And I
Uh,
think what we're addressing, isn't it? I mean, I think this course is definitely aimed at fathers who have got kind of children who are in the middle phase of childhood, and I think what you're about to talk about adolescence, because these are where the more
yeah,
tricky questions come in. Am I safe as a toddler is easy in that sense. You've got to keep them safe. Good boy, good girl, teaching them basic disciplines. But do you say once they get older, the questions get more complicated? What am I good at? And you can't necessarily control that in the same way, can you? If they're not very good at something, it's difficult to then
yeah,
convince them that they're brilliant at maths when they're coming bottom of the class all the time. And so this is again thinking about being intentional. This whole thing about understanding your child is about knowing what stage they're at and what the questions they're asking are, and then intentionally kind of working out how you can do certain activities in these stages to really bolster and strengthen them, I guess, isn't it? So,
absolutely, yeah. And in a minute, just make a mental note because we'll come on to there's parental shifts at these. There's 4 parental shifts that match these things, and there's some questions in the workbook about that. But before we go on to those parental shifts, yeah, the 5th stage is adolescence. So this is the 12 to 19 sort of age. Of course, it can go on longer. This extended adolescence period, but this is really about identity and my
mm,
role. The big question for our adolescents is, who am I? Um, how am I unique? But also, how do I fit in? That's a massive question for teenagers. I want to be unique. I am my own person, but I desperately want to fit in and be like everyone else. It's questions like, who am I attracted to? Um, how do I make decisions? What role am I going to have? So a lot of teenagers will dive into certain roles. It might be around identity. It might be a certain type of dressing or being with a certain group of people. They'll dive into it to kind of almost like try some clothes on and say, what does it feel like to be in this group or that
yeah,
group? Um, and and it's a really up and down time, and they'll be experimenting, and it can be really easy to dismiss these as phases.
yeah,
It can be really easy as parents to actually be negative about it. and to laugh and to say, "Oh, you've just been a teenager," or I do hear lots of lots of things thrown around like that. But I would say, whilst we can have fun with our kids, of course, we need to be careful as well not to dismiss these stages, not to make fun of them, because we can easily think, "Oh well, I know that in later life, you're going to think differently. Like when you've gone through this phase, you're going to settle down and all be okay." But we've got to be careful not to dismiss the fact that as teenagers, they are really feeling these things. It's real for them. And they're looking for someone to acknowledge that and to not just sort of dismiss them or look down on them. And so that's part of our role as parents will be to is kind of say, how can I have a strong relationship with my teenager when I can actually walk alongside them?
Mm.
But yeah, so it can be a difficult time. What were your reflections on the sort of challenges for this adolescent phase?
Mm. I think this could be. I mean, I speak from some experience here. That really you can be quite scared as a parent in this stage,
Mm,
because again, what you tend to do is you tend to. What I tend to do anyway, and I've seen it in other people that I've walked alongside with. You see your children in the teenage years doing certain things and questioning some things, and you almost kind of you
yeah.
can see the outworking of that.
Mm,
And so your tendency is almost to panic and overcompensate, to try and either shut that behavior down or to kind of manage that behavior in a different way.
yeah.
Um, and it's kind of that, yeah, as you say, it's kind of, I think it's a very scary time, which is why we wanted to do this session on understanding your child, because, and particularly understanding them kind of almost biologically, I guess, in that sense, because I
Yeah.
think as parents, this is where often relationship breaks down between
Yeah.
parents and their children. I had a lovely relationship with my daughter up until the age of 10, and suddenly something's
Mm.
gone wrong, and my
Yeah.
relationship's
Most common.
completely
Yeah.
disintegrated. And I think so often it's because we're not getting this bit right. We're not understanding them. We're
Yeah.
overreacting, or potentially, as you say, underreacting at times to
Yeah.
things. And it's that fine balance, and somehow building relationships through it, not simply dismissing everything they're doing, but kind of working it
Yeah.
through with them. So I think actually this
Yeah.
is the bit, as a parent, I feel quite afraid of this stage, because you're worried about what they're going through, and you're almost ill prepared for the questions they're asking.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, it's definitely true that, but up to the age of 12, sometimes as you say, 10, particularly for girls, but it happens a bit sooner. There's this they're your lovely child. I hear people say, "Oh, they were just so nice, and they just
Yeah.
listened to everything that I said, and if they wanted sort of the authoritative view on something, actually I could give it to them." But then
Mhm.
suddenly something's changed, and they're not listening to everything that I say, and they're pushing back, and some children are quite extreme with it because they're trying to find their own identity, and what that means is I'm not my parents, and I'm looking for my own identity. I'm trying to
Mm.
find who I am, and I'm actually willing to do something that's completely opposite to and I'm going to question authority. And if you're a bit more if you're used to being a more authoritative kind of parent, and you're used to your child sort of doing what you've arranged and what you've said, for them to push back, as you say, can be scary, can be frustrating. People can get angry with their teens.
Mm. And
So, and I think we need to allow, as you say, allow that space to question,
mm,
allow the space to doubt. So when it comes to faith, this is a time where teenagers will question their faith. Is this my own,
mm,
or is it just my parents'? And we know from studies that a lot of young people have walked away from the Christian faith, and they've said later on, they said, actually, I didn't have the opportunity to doubt, to ask my questions. They were suppressed. I was told not to ask them. I was
mm,
told to just believe it, because probably as a reflection of adults not feeling like they had the answers or had the techniques to talk and to handle that kind of destabilizing phase of being a teenager when we can't fix everything.
mm,
So we're going to be looking into this, aren't we, just throughout the course, as we're saying, this is the journey. This is a lot of for us. A lot of us is a big thing. We may feel that our relationship with our teenager is getting on towards non-existent. They seem like a different person,
mm,
but we hope that over the weeks and over the months of discussing, of looking through, having difficult conversations, which we'll look at later on, that actually we'll find ways of connecting well with our teenagers as well.
mm,
And I think it's just a reflection that actually the way we parent children at different ages, if you like, different stages, does change. And so, there are these shifts that map on to these kind of developmental stages. And I describe them as a shift from loving discipline at stage one. That's between the ages of 1 and 5.
Mhm.
And children at that age, they need discipline. They need to have consistent boundaries. It's to teach that actions have consequences. Teach them there are dangers in the world, and that they need to avoid. So that sort of loving discipline between the ages of 1 and 5, covering infancy and early childhood. You've then got the training stages around middle, late childhood, between the ages of 5 and 12. And this is where children often know right and wrong, but they're going to school, they're seeing how other kids act. And as a parent, you're becoming more of a trainer. You're teaching them how to interact with the world. You're teaching them your values at home. You're teaching them to love God, and to love other people. And oftentimes you are instilling some consequences, but they're often learning from natural consequences. So they might get home and this happened today, and I reacted in this way to this child, and you're then just there to help reflect on, oh, how did you respond, and could you have done that differently? Um, yeah, and so that sort of sense, that conversational culture that you're looking for at home,
Mm.
to train your children. And I think sort of stage three of the parenting shift is really the teenage stages, sort of the age of 12 to 19, where you're becoming more of a coach. So you've gone through the discipline, the training stage, and sometimes training is still there, but you're much more coaching them. You're much more helping to release them to understand God, understand themselves, understand the world around them. It means listening and asking good questions. Those
Yeah.
are the key things. We'll talk more about this in conversations, but the key things are having a strong relationship where you can listen and ask them good questions. Teenagers don't always want to know what you think, certainly not straight away. But by listening and asking questions, and then when it's welcomed, giving them some advice, we can have a huge influence on our
Mm.
teenagers through with this warm relationship, much more sort of alongside coaching through questions and listening. Does that make sense, Tim, or am I just
Oh,
waffling
it
on
does.
here?
It does. And I think what one of the things about being an intentional father is the shift between training and coaching. And I
Mm,
think one of the problems with a lot of parents is, and their breakdown when they see a breakdown of their relationship, is they're still trying to train their teenager. And I know if you're a mum and you're listening to this, you're still trying to train your teenagers to put their clothes in the washing basket. I don't think that's quite what we're talking about. But again,
yeah.
rather than the approach of yeah, kind of rather than that approach of kind of helping them think it through as a good listener and a good questioner, we're either trying to tell them what to do, or, and I think you're going to talk about this, the last stage, which is friendship. So once obviously they go and
Mm,
become 18, then really as a parent, you're then trying to build a friendship with your child. But I think one of the mistakes that's happened in our culture is that we've gone from training to friendship and missed out coaching in the middle. And
that's a great point.
and I, and I think that too often parents are now trying to be their friends with their children too early. My ambition is to be friends with my kids, and I love
Yeah.
spending time with my children, but they are not my friends. And there are times when I need to do things as a parent that is right for them, and to challenge them in a way that may compromise my friendship with them. But I'm not their friend at this point. I'm actually still their coach, really, and I'm still kind of overseeing that. And I think this is part of what I
Yeah.
want to do in this course is helping you realize, again, this is why we're doing this stuff on the biology of it, because we want you to understand that your child is going through these shifts and your approach to parenting needs to adapt based on which
Yeah.
stage they're at. If you're trying to still teach them what to do all the time in teenage years, you're gonna battle up against it. And
Mm,
like I had an example which Nathan is my eldest, and he got baptized recently. And part of his testimony was around how we handled him playing cricket on a Sunday.
mm,
And his all of his matches were pretty much on a Sunday, and he had a choice to make: was he going
mm,
to go to church or was he going to go and play cricket? Now, rather than saying you are going to do this, we actually coached him through that decision. And part of his testimony when he shared at his baptism was really that was a key moment for
mm,
him in his decision making process. And I could have said, no, our family doesn't play sport on a Sunday, which we don't, and I kind of believe in it is important as a family to attend church wherever possible together. But I really wanted him to come to that decision. So as a coach, I was working through that. Whereas when they were younger and
Mm.
they had an event as a child, I was just like, no, that's not happening. It wasn't a conversation. It was just
Yeah,
a decision earlier on. And so I guess that's kind of the point you're making, isn't it? Really trying to
yeah,
understand what stage, and I think that's where further on in this course we're going to do listening skills basically, and how to have
yeah,
difficult conversations with your child as this kind of
yeah.
coach rather than as just someone telling them what to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, and coaching is very much about I call that the C, SEA, support, encouragement, accountability. You're there to support. You're the biggest cheerleader for your teenager. You're saying, "Look, I love you. I think you're brilliant. Um, you know, let's learn how to do life together. And I'm here for you. I'm here to encourage you, but I'm also here for some accountability. Like there was this times when actually I'm still your parent, as you were saying to him, I'm still your parent, and there's actually times when things will go wrong and you may make bad decisions. But I believe in you, and I want you to become a great decision maker.
Yeah,
And I'm for you, and that's what we want to have with our teenagers is working on that relationship, just working on just spending time with them. And as Tim, you're alluding to that fourth stage of parenting, after we've gone through discipline, training, coaching, we're working towards friendship. We're
yeah,
working towards hopefully a lifetime of friendship when they're taking full responsibility for their choices and they're mature and responsible adults. And that's really where we were in our last session. Where do we want our kids to get to when they leave at 18 or whenever it is? We want them to be mature, responsible adults who know how to make good decisions, who have had some protection and some support and encouragement through making multiple decisions and choices in their teenage years with some protection around them. So yeah, so that's we've looked there at some of the psychological stages and then at those four parental shifts. Um, and I think to finish off, it would be great to we talked about a bit about physical stuff, about the psychology, all P's today, and talk a little bit about personality and preferences to finish off because our children are different. We all know this, that they have different personalities. So, Tim, what's some of your reflections on how personality amongst our children can be so different?
yeah. I think it's obvious, isn't it? Every kid's got their own personality. You identify that even in the early stage of their development, that their personalities are very different.
Yeah,
My youngest child is very loud and quite argumentative, and very kind of able to get his own way. And my oldest son is much more amenable and kind and gentle, and just different personalities. And I think this is where it's so important as parents. I think we have to do the hard work around really understanding our child's personality. And I think what's difficult about this is it is a
mm,
continual watching game, because
yes,
their personalities do change a little bit. There are obviously certain things that you think, yeah, they've always been like that, but actually their personality does change and shift. And again, some of that's hormonal, biological,
mm,
situational things happen in their life, and they change. And I think this is what we really want you to do as an intentional parent. We're thinking about,
yeah,
what is my child's personality? How can I recognize, for example, so one of my children is naturally anxious, so he's a naturally more anxious child. So the way that I parent him is different to one of my youngest child who has no problems with anxiety whatsoever. Like, his problem is slowing him
mm,
down and making him think. And so this is
yeah,
why I want you to take some time in the reflection activities, isn't it, to really ponder that.
mm,
What is my child's personality? And I think we're going to encourage you to do a little personality test on yourself if you haven't done one,
mm,
and also potentially one for your children, so that you can kind of
mm,
just think, okay, they're maybe orientated like this. So a classic isn't it, is my oldest son is very very relaxed, so he's always late to things. He's always very kind of doesn't stress, doesn't worry, etc. Whereas one of my other children is definitely more likes to be on time, likes to make sure things are done properly. And again, if your family dynamic is very chaotic and you've got a child who likes things to be done in an organized fashion, then it can be very
it's
stressful for them, I
stressful.
think.
Yeah,
Equally, if
yeah,
you're quite an organised family and you've got a child that's a bit chaotic, you're going to come into conflict with them on a regular
yeah,
basis, because they just want the freedom. And yeah, it's all easy. And I think sometimes we can be so. And again, it comes back to our conversation about values.
Yeah.
If what we value is order and punctuality, but we've got a child whose personality, to be honest, isn't really kind of fitted to that, there's a space for
Yeah.
conflict. And I think this is why, again, it's all about just understanding, thinking about our children, recognizing that's going to be a pinch point. And if I don't recognize that pinch point, my relationship will disintegrate with them
Yeah.
over time if I'm constantly arguing with them, but I haven't recognized why I'm arguing with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me,
Yeah.
personality is vitally important.
Yeah, hugely. And that's the great thing with studying our children a little bit. And that's the question we're going to be discussing together is how might we better understand them? One of those ways is to do a very simple, we quite like the True Colours personality test. I've actually done it with my 13-year-old. Really interesting. The big takeaway for her actually was not so much, oh, this is how God's made me and how I respond. And oh, yeah, that's really helpful. It was also that, oh, yeah, my friends are different to me. And although that may seem very obvious, just beginning to appreciate other people's strengths and weaknesses and understand that is so helpful, I think,
Mm,
for teenagers. So we're
yeah.
going to talk about those questions, and then in the workbook we've got like a coaching chart, which is kind of so you can list out some of the almost like a profile of your children. Now we sports teams do this all the time, and if you play FIFA or any of the football games, you have like the coaching chart. So passing, my passing stat out of 100 would be like 25, speed 24, height 100. So you'd have all these different like scores. Now, I'm not saying you score your kids out of 100 necessarily, but what we want to do is look at the profile of your children. What are their strengths and their weaknesses? What's their personality? Tim's just given some examples there, which is really, really helpful. And then as we'll look towards the end of the course a bit more about being a family. But we're starting to get to that stage where we're saying, how has God formed us as a family? How do each of my children, fit into this team, if you like, that we are as a family with our strengths and our weaknesses? And how do we together be a team that's going to bless the world? What is it that my fourth child who's just come into our world and my family, what does he bring to our family that we lacked before? How can we appreciate the personality and the skills and so on that he brings that makes us as a family one that can bless the world perhaps even more effectively. So our
Mm.
personalities, we're going to look at that in the context of family as well. And then just as we finish, really, preferences. Tell us a bit about that, Tim, as we finish.
Yeah, so I mean, preferences are in a sense much more obvious to spot, aren't they? Things like, do they have an inclination towards music or sport or art or drama or any of those kind of different type of things? And I think where we're being intentional is again by spotting those preferences. What it enables us
Yeah.
to do is to use those preferences to support some of the other values that we're trying to make. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is give our children, certainly I am anyway, trying to give my kids confidence. To really believe that they are valuable, that they are good at things. It's so important to believe you're good at something. And
Yeah.
so, for example, if you see that your child's got a preference, and this is where it makes a difference, is making a sacrifice in your own life to give more time to that so that they can be really good at that thing
Yeah.
is important, so they can feel really positive about what they're doing. And again, these preferences allow us opportunity to handle disappointment, for example. So if
Mm,
they're doing music and they're going to take a grade exam, they may or may not pass their grade exam, but it's okay if they fail, because you're not devastated, because if your personal value is achievement above everything else, then you're going to see the grade exam failure as a disaster. But if
yeah.
if your personal value is trying hard and giving
Yeah.
your best, then it's an opportunity to reinforce that value. And I think
Mm,
this is where again it's all about this thinking, being proactive, intentionally thinking about seeing opportunities to develop our children
yeah.
through their
And
preferences.
we need to do it together because my preferences are different to some of my children's. And if I'm saying that my preference is is sport and I really value it and I think you have to be in a sports team, but one of my kids is saying to me, I don't want to be. I want to do music instead or something else. That's where as a dad, I need help sometimes to say, okay, that's all right.
Mm,
Just because their preference is different, that's okay. And actually, as a team, as a group of people doing this together, actually it's really reassuring sometimes when we realize, oh, that's great, and someone else's kid is doing that and they haven't gone off the rails because they don't love sport or they don't
mm,
love music or something.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to doing more of that together, and asking those questions. How can we have conversations with our teenagers and children about that? How can we harness their interest? How do we spend time with them? And so on. So yeah, excited.
Yeah, and so that's going to bring to a conclusion this session. It's been great as always, John, to work through these things. We're looking forward to you being able to we'll talk through these things together in our small groups. If you're joining us on our Zoom, then brilliant. We look forward to talking these things through. But you've got your workbooks. Please just start maybe reflecting again. We do encourage you. I know this is for fathers, but you need to do this in partnership with your spouse. It's so important because often they'll have insight that you don't have. And again, I think this is it's really about conversation, isn't it, John? It's about creating conversation. It's about planning and thinking. And we're not going to be perfect parents, but we can be parents that are helping our children to grow towards Christ. So on that note, John, thank you very much. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, Tim. See you.